Welcome to the 2020 NSS Virtual Convention presentation on the 2019 Tears of the Turtle expedition. My name is Pete Johnson. For those who don't know, Tears of the Turtle is the deepest limestone cave in the United States, deepest cave in the lower 48, sort of deepest cave outside of lava tubes in Hawaii. Exploration's been ongoing for a number of years, which is, I'll give a little bit of a background on. But we had a big trip with 25 people last summer to go back to try to push the cave deeper. Prior to the expedition in the previous year, we had just left the cave. Well, we hadn't left, we'd run out of time, but the lead just continued to go at the bottom. So we were going back to see if we could push the cave deeper. Before I start, I'm actually just going to go ahead and thank a few organizations and people. We received grant money from the NSS, from Northern Rocky Mountain Grotto, and we also received rope from PMI. For sure, without the generous support of those organizations, trips like this would be really, really difficult. So I did want to go ahead and highlight that right off the top. Also, please tip your photographers. Hauling expensive photo equipment to the bottom of a cave is obviously a little bit risky and takes a lot of extra weight and work. And freeloaders like me just use your photos for presentation. So I did want to go ahead and just, the photos you're about to see, some of which are, fantastic, are from these people. And also the maps, Hans Bodenheimer, who, contrary to the sound of his name, is not a figure from German folklore, but a legendary Montana caver, genuinely fantastic person, and really good cartographer. So the maps you're going to see are from him. Tears has been going on a long time. You can kind of see the list of surveys here. I don't even know that this is comprehensive, but exploration has been going on since 2015, and there's no way to map a cave like this without all these people. So I also just wanted to go ahead and give them credit where credit is due, from hiking all the way out into the middle of nowhere and getting this cave done. Tears is in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which is a Forest Service unit in northwestern Montana. You can kind of get a rough idea of where we're talking about right here. There's actually quite a bit of storied history in Bob Marshall Wilderness in American caving. You may have heard some of these famous stories from the 70s where guys went out there for weeks and weeks at a time with nothing but a sack of potatoes to push Silvertip and Scapegoat and some of these other well-known cave systems. But it turned out that if you went, just a little bit farther south of Silvertip, you ended up finding a handful of caves that hadn't been checked. And that's kind of exactly what happened in 2015 when Jason Belinsky, Hans, Philip Reichwalder, and Ben Sansbury went out there. They were kind of just poking around and found these entrances in the cliffs, but didn't actually get that far in. But they did find this. This is the entrance to Tears. You can kind of see this glacier-formed cliff face that's typical of the area out there. But they were sort of stopped by, a spot that got a little bit tight. They thought, maybe there's a lead up high, but kind of just left it. And they, part of the reason they left it is because they also found Virgil, which is, I believe, the third or fourth deepest cave in the U.S. right now, which is just sort of one drainage over. So they were typically working that. This is the entrance of Virgil. But they sort of graphed that coming back, and they saw that what the line plot data looked like. This is a little more current than what they saw, but if you think about something ending right here, this is Tears, this is all Virgil, and they kind of knew that this infeeder was here, and they said, well, wait a minute, it sort of looks like it's trending towards Virgil. Obviously now we know that it doesn't, but they decided to go back and have a second look. So this is sort of what they found in 2015, and in 2012 they went back, and James Hunter was able to climb up and find a way past that tight spot down into quite a bit of cave, down and past the birthday pit, which is one of the bigger pits in the cave. 2013, that got pushed further through what's known as the Bunga Bunga Meanders, which is a very tight and muddy and kind of miserable section of the cave. And at that point, they found this kind of anomaly. It's what we call the borehole. It's just this one spot in the cave that sort of flattens out a little bit and pops out into a big room. And 2014 went back again. That was my first year out. Again, these are all still day trips, but pushed past the borehole, a whole bunch of drops, and hit what was named the Slough of Despond, which is just basically this water and mud filled hallway that nobody really knew how to get past. there's some famous stories of Carl Byrne losing his boot in the mud down there, but pushing it. I think it was James Hunter, Ian McMillan, Jason, and Carl on the final trip on 2014 that got stopped by this kind of WTF spot in the cave where after all this work to get down there, you find this strange feature. You can kind of see just how consistent the dip on the cave is. This is looking at it in profile. And it's just filled with all these like kind of tiny nuisance drops. I think Birthday Pit was maybe the largest. I don't actually know the drop offhand, but let's say maybe 60 feet, 50. It's not a big drop. But there's 47 ropes rigged between the entrance and the Slough of Despond. So there's quite a bit of vertical work, but a lot of it is just, like I said, nuisance drops. So again, we kind of had this lined up. We had this in feeder coming in from Virgil, which still, was unchecked. So in 2016, we kind of went back. You can also see these sort of classic, fantastic glacier formed valleys where the glacier has worn out and actually exposed the entrances and cliff faces. These entrances probably would not be accessible at all if it was not for the glaciers. But in 2016, we went back. This kind of gives you a little feel for it. Here's those cliff faces. This is what the landscape looks like. And we kind of got to the point in 2016 where we said, this is no longer possible on day trips. We kind of got these big teams and decided that we were going to set up a camp in the cave. So we went out for 9 days, 2 camp teams, all these support teams to get the materials down into camp and set up this kind of miserable plastic sheeting tent city thing in the bottom of the borehole, which you can tell is just this kind of muddy, miserable. But not only is this kind of the best spot to camp in the cave, it's almost literally the only spot because everything else, as I'll show you, gets pretty tight. Here it is, just kind of what it looks like when you're down there. But Ian Checkett and James Hunter, Jason Blinsky formed the second camp team. On the first camp team, me, Ben Tobin, and Ben Schwartz went down, and we'd spent, there we were sleeping, which is kind of what you do most of the time when you're in the cave, when you're not caving. We'd spent the years in between trips just saying, okay, how are we going to get across this weird mud-filled hallway? And we came up with this idea of these boots that were designed for Alaskan tidal flats. So they're kind of made to just walk across mud in these awful conditions. This was a terrible idea. We hauled these things all the way down into the cave. I took a trekking pole we kind of brought to probe the mud and the water and put not only the entire trekking pole into the water, but also kind of, halfway up to my elbow. So it's pretty clear we were not going to walk across this muddy, that the ground for most of it, at least the first 10 to 15 feet, was not stable enough to walk on. So we, instead, Ben Schwartzer just ended up direct aiding down the entire length of the hallway. We left this kind of silly, you can pause this and read it if you want, but we left this kind of silly Airbnb check-in note for James and Ian and James and Ian and Jason on team 2. And they kind of got across there and pushed down back into awful muddy fissure passage. You can just again see how happy they are to be in this fantastic pleasant cave, 38 degrees or whatever it is, and muddy and tight. And that's where that ended. So on 2019, we planned, I threw all this is just time lapse of me packing for 2019. This is kind of all the group gear. You can see the pirate flag, some of our personal gear, but just all the stuff that it's going to take for a 2-week trip out with 25 people. Head out to the Bob Marshall. For those of you who've never been out there, it's pretty remote. It's 24 miles from the trailhead to the actual cave. You may hear these fantastic stories of Canadians taking helicopters to all their caves. We do not have that luxury. Everything's got to go in on mule, but still helps a ton with the weight. So this is us kind of packing up, throw the stuff on the horses and off you go down the trail. You can see this is actually a mule team coming back out, but similar. You hike kind of in along the South Fork of the Flathead River, which we actually raft back out in, which I'll talk about later. Here we are at the camp spot on night 1 on the hike in. This is just kind of more of the landscape before you start to get up into the actual more alpine area off the river. This is Gene Kreshka stopping to pick some huckleberries. Just everybody getting a drink. You'll see this fantastic bear grass everywhere up there. And then we kind of hit the spot. You can sort of see the trail here in the background where this is Pagoda Pass, and the trail kind of comes up and drops down over the side of the pass. We leave the trail here and hike up and over about 1.5 miles to our surface camp. And then the next day we'll come back and actually meet the mules there. It takes them a little bit longer to get in, but that gives us time to get our camp set up, empty our packs out so that we can go back the next day to kind of meet you can see the mule team down here that we're meeting them on the pass. They do this kind of giant yard sale. Everybody picks up what they can and does this. Off go the mules. Again, back up and over this off trail section that's filled with some screen. Pretty. It's not too long, but it can be a little bit miserable in spots. Often with these big heavy packs, we sort of just take a day just to hump the material. Here's a Nick Saki, double packing coming down into camp. Again, here's Paul Winter looking at just kind of some of the typical karst landscape near camp. This does not go, unfortunately. It looks like a good feature, but it doesn't go anywhere. And this is where we camp. There's a pretty good water source, which is why we stay there. We're still 2 miles from the actual cave entrance, maybe. But it's pretty comfortable. We get a good flagpole set up, the gear. We get a little mess area, and just sort of try to fight these ground squirrel type rodents that, we refer to as the chiz, which is short for chisel tooth vermin. Matt Covington by the fire. There's a good picture of our flagpole. There's a couple caves up in these cliffs too, but they're a little bit shorter. There's just Jason kind of doing the gear sorting. Everybody around camp. Just some gear. Everything gets pretty muddy, so all the teams cycling in and out of the cave. We end up spending a lot of time washing gear in this kind of pool that formed in the stream where this giant tree tripped over or fell over. But it's pretty comfortable on the surface, and you can see this is kind of a typical scene at night. Keely Owens also painted this, fantastic watercolor of everybody hanging out at camp, which is pretty cool. But next day, sort of most of the people on the trip kind of headed up to the cave in order to supply. I think we had 11 people going to the cave on one day, which is probably a record. But that's a lot of people just to help supply the camp team to haul all the packs down. Jason climbing up into the entrance there. Jason, I think I forgot to mention, has been organizing all these trips back prior to this one. He had a kid, so for 2019, he asked me to kind of do all the logistics. He said, I'll come on out, but you sort of need to do the legwork to get the trip going, because with 25 people, it's not an insignificant amount of work to get all the logistics on that. Everybody's suiting up in the entrance. You can kind of see the worn out gear. In 2016, Ian Checkett had actually dropped registers in the entrance to the cave, and we were pretty shocked to see that somebody had actually come out and hiked all the way out there just to go to the entrance of the cave. You can kind of see our entrance from 2016 here, and then this is 2019. I love the quote. It says, "Only went down a couple hundred yards. We're not professional cavers." We're not either, Maynard. Couple pictures just showing what the passage is like. So again, you get these, sort of typical Vados passage with the kind of nuisance drops. It's a lot of this type of, but most of it, those are kind of pretty pictures. Most of it looks like this. And it's just a really physical cave. There's not really a ton of features that you can say, oh my God, that one feature is so terrible. It's just sort of this sustained, hard, tight passage where a lot of times you're off the ground, as you can see here, and you're sort of just stemming between this really kind of gritty rock that just tears gear up and tears your body up. And eventually it'll just pop out quickly into these little drops with the pool, and you can kind of see us hauling the packs down there for camp. But for the most part, it's just this miserable, tight fissure passage. You can kind of see the sort of rigging you're dealing with in tight passage there. But then it drops into the borehole. Briefly, it gets back into tight stuff pretty quick, but it gave us sort of a reprieve for camp. You can't see it here. There's a big infeeder in the ceiling. When we're on camp teams, we'll literally just get under that in our PVC in the 38-degree water just to try to wash it off, just scrub down with, kitchen brush that we bring down. And on this trip, I was actually down there for 7 days. So the Velcro on my suit in all the mud, you'll see how bad the mud gets. Started to fail. So, I would kind of have to just sit over the pool and splash water into my open chest suit to try to scrub down the mud off my Velcro and hope that it lasts another day. So this is us in 2019 setting camp back up. You can kind of see just laying down this plastic tarp. This is not dirty yet. Don't worry. I'll show you pictures of dirty. Um, it's sort of this like weird process where people swap. One person's dirty, one person's clean. You get the clean person on the tarp, and there's just sort of the same picture of us messing around with gear, and you get the tent city that I sort of showed in the first few slides set up. That trip, we didn't get out of the cave until 3 a.m. I mean, we hauled 11 people down there, hauled all the stuff, dropped it off. Long trip, long, hard trip. I think I wrote an article about the 2014 trip in which I talked about how content you feel the day after a trip like that. And you just sort of sit in the sun, relaxing, your body's just completely shot and worn out, but you're just sort of refueling with quesadillas in the sun. I don't know if it was 5 years later. I don't know what it was. This year, I just pretty much slept the whole next day. I don't think I moved from that spot for about 4 hours. So it wasn't quite as relaxing the following day. Just got a George Breeley doing the same thing, just completely shot after a day of caving. Meanwhile, here's Paul Winter, Eric Pelkey, Nick Saki in camp with Jason. They look relatively happy. You can kind of see camp is pretty comfy once you get it set up. They were down there for a couple days. Where that video doesn't work. I think that slide was from a previous one, but they were down there for a couple days, and we're waiting for them to get out. And the plan was Jason took camp team 1 with the 3 of them. I was going to take camp team 3, and Ben Tobin was going to take camp team 2. Of course, Ben Tobin, shortly before the trip, hurt his shoulder and wasn't able to make it out. So the plan then was for me to do camp team 2 and 3. So we're waiting, and the way it works is the camp team that's in the cave is exiting the same day that the new team is coming in. So we were sort of expecting to only see them in the cave on our way in, but the night before, Jason kind of comes stomping up the hill early, saying, well, we ran out of rigging. They didn't get a whole lot farther than they did the previous year, but they did get a kind of nasty traverse rigged that was a little bit difficult to get through. And shortly after him, Paul and Eric and Nick come stomping up the hill as well. But we were a little bit shocked to see them. And they came back with data. You can tell it's a little bit muddy, but we did get data out of it. There it is, just drying out on the surface. The cave it's again pretty hard. I mean, I try not to overstate it too much, but the running joke after this year was that one of the 12 people who camped, I won't say who, deleted the pornography off their phone before they went down there in case they didn't make it. They didn't want anybody to find it. And again, just to kind of emphasize this mud, you have this like changing tarp that is between the tent. This is kind of where you sleep. The tent is mostly, by the way, just to keep warmth in. That's why we set it up. You have this changing tarp, and so everybody will kind of peel out of their gear and do this sort of passing of gear from clean to dirty, but to give you a feeling like that here's 3 full sets of gear in this muddy mess. So they came back the next day. We all kind of headed back up to the entrance again. Camp team 2 was me, Tommy Kleckner, and Gilly Elor. Down into the cave. Here's like a good picture of us doing the clean dirty transition at camp. So there's Gilly staying dirty, I'm intermediate, and I believe Tommy was clean. And I'll reach into the dirty pack and pull out the dry bags, open those up, and hand them to Tommy to take fully clean. If you don't do that, you end up just making a complete mess of the tarps. Again, like you can just see kind of how filthy the mud is. It's this weird glacial silt. Halfway through that trip was my 35th birthday, so Gilly snuck down some chocolate and some bourbon. There's just me curled up in camp, getting 1 year older. And again, here's like the changing process in the morning. It's just this sort of slow, methodical, trying to get in and out of your just filthy gear. The gear does not survive. I think I went out with a new harness, mostly new gear, and the only piece of soft gear that I had that made it through 7 days was my foot loop and chest harness. I was so concerned about my harness making it because the double back on the harness in the back was getting so frayed that I was, every night was kind of duct taping a new PVC patch to my harness just to try to keep the wear down. So you're just constantly sort of speedy stitching gear, whether in the cave or out of the cave, just to try to keep it going. On the right, you can see the Shazam suits we bought in, I think, 2014. which was kind of fun because they all look like matching superhero costumes. But I think we're down to like 2 of those. I think almost all of them, including mine. This 2019 was last year for mine. It's just shot. I mean, I must have stitched up, 10 or 15 holes in the butt of that thing, including one that I tore a hole so big that I gashed my right ass cheek and didn't even notice it for 2 hours because it's so cold. There's so much mud. But I think I checked when I wrote the article for the NSS News, and there's still a scar. George doing the same thing. So we went back down to where they were, where they kind of finished up before. We surveyed to part of what they had that they had gone through on the first camp team, but we really weren't much farther than this point from 2016. And we started aid climbing up this sort of tight spot in the fissure where you couldn't get through at the bottom. So just involved aid climbing up and over. But, we just, everything down there is logistically difficult. You're just covered in mud and it's a mess. And that, between I think I dropped the hammer drill and we had a couple other issues. I'm trying to aid climb while Gilly and Tommy are surveying what hadn't been surveyed yet. And I think, in about a day and a half, we really just got maybe 30 feet up, 35 feet up, and then started rigging forward horizontally into this fissure in order to try to make forward progress. But it's for sending 25 people up to support the kind of leading edge of this exploration, it just feels painfully slow. So I kind of curled up in camp on day 4 in the sleeping bag in the fetal position while Gilly and Tommy exited the cave. They headed to the surface. I sent this note with them, which just said that, Camp Team 2, 134 feet of survey, no retreat, no surrender. Meanwhile, I'm waiting for Matt Covington, George Brealey, and Ian McMillan, just kind of hanging out in the miserable camp in tears. Not here, basically. You can see, though, there's pretty classic karst topography across the way. And so while I was kind of curled up in the cave for 7 days, the rest of the team was getting quite a bit done on the surface. Keely Owens and Corey Hackley kind of did a ridge walk, sort of away team 2 or 3 day trip across and found a number of entrances and features that need to be checked on subsequent trips. Double Date, which is actually pretty close to camp. Mark Wingard, Carl Frosley, and Kevin Manley did a series of aid climbs in there. You can kind of see them squeezing through some passage here. There's Carl doing, just hamming for the camera like usual. They kind of got up one of them, and if one of them still goes, one of them they checked off. But we're getting to the point where there's such attrition on tiers trips that I think basically James Hunter, Beth Courtwright, and the 3 of them are now the subject matter experts out there on Double Date. So I kind of told them after the trip, you guys may know more than most people about that cave that we're going to get to come back out. There's Beth. So in 2016, Ben Schwartz had done an aid climb in the entrance of Tiers. This is kind of an ice feature in the entrance of Tiers, and he'd gotten quite a ways up it, but it sort of came to a ledge and then I think kept going. So James Hunter, unencumbered this year of camping, sort of proceeded to knock out a whole handful of aid climbs that had been sitting around for a while, including this one. They actually ended up getting up into that and climbing even further up. They found a little bit of horizontal passage in both directions, but kind of knocked it all off, didn't go. But more importantly, they added 79 feet of depth to the cave by climbing up and setting a new high point. But the rope, when they showed up, was kind of frozen into this ice feature. So they first had to kind of bash it out and get the rope free a little bit before they started. Same sort of group. You got again, Gene Kretschka, Kevin, Hope, Beth Courtwright, and James going into Virgil. So Virgil again is just one drainage over. I think it's the 3rd or 4th deepest cave. But there were a handful of leads there that needed to be done that were aid climbs. The nature of the cave is much different. It's kind of just a big giant borehole, but there are a few drops, including this one, which is known as Death is All Around Us. It's kind of just this series of stacked flagstone-like blocks. So pretty apropos, but generally much easier cave. Still not easy cave, but much easier than Tiers. But they got down to this infeeder. That's the infeeder that I showed you at the beginning on the line plot. James and I had started a aid climb up that infeeder, just a short little, maybe 30-foot, 35-foot climb up into a fissure passage when we were on a previous trip in 2014, but it had never been completed. So they were all heading back to do that. You can kind of just see the same sort of infeeder feature going back. There's a little bit of a tight squeeze to get back there. And if you've never done a tight squeeze in cold cave, it can be pretty nerve-wracking, 10 feet of that. Here's James kind of finishing up the climb. He ended up getting up there and again hit like a pretty decent chunk of fissure passage, horizontal passage, but ended up getting stopped by another aid climb, and that's where it's been left. Kevin and Hope there at the entrance. You can see the packs are hung because the rodents will just chew anything you leave in the entrances if you don't. So that's that infeeder. You can tell, so they're actually even a little bit farther here. So it's only a couple hundred feet now from tiers. And it would add depth just because this point is a little bit deeper than any point in tiers. But there's no obvious connection point within tiers. Obviously tiers is a sort of tall, narrow fissure passage, so it's possible there's something up high. Meanwhile, and they also, let me go back one second. They also did an aid climb that was left at the bottom of Virgil that did not go to. Meanwhile, this is, Camp Team 3. We're kind of down there at the bottom of the cave. I didn't have to wait too long for Matt Covington and Ian McMillan and George Brealey to show up. Here we are wrapped in down, making ourselves some warm water, hanging out in camp. And it's just, sort of comfy camp in the sea of mud. Here's probably a good shot for what the mud looks like when you come up from the bottom of the cave. So everything past the borehole is probably the worst section of mud. You just have nothing left that's clean on you. But we went down, it gets a little miserable down there. We didn't take too many pictures, but past the Slough of Despond, you kind of hit this flowstone choke. We pushed through that. You push through sort of a series of through cave that kind of meanders, past that traverse that Jason did, back to the traverse that Gilly and Tommy and I had worked on. George kind of took a crack at it and made pretty quick work of pushing through the rest of it, and ended up popping out at the top of a drop that he named No More Tears. Probably, one of the nicest drops in the cave. And that dropped back down into downward trending, clean fissure passage again. So after a few years of these just miserable grinding camp trips, trying to get through all this kind of tight, muddy fissure passage past camp, it feels like we're finally back into downward trending cave. It's probably the best place that I've left the cave since I've been involved in it, the project. But it's getting to the point where you're now 3 hours past camp. So the debate is, if you did a 4-team camp trip, 4-day camp trip, would you go down for one day, just do a long 24-hour survey day, take a full rest day in camp, and then exit again? So we're kind of debating what the best way to go back is. But once again, we've left the cave now with just the lead at the bottom still going. We added, something around 200 feet of depth. So the cave is now 1,863 feet deep. The question becomes, how deep does it go? So, if you look, this is tiers right here. There's about 200 feet of depth potential left before you hit the river. And there's kind of two theories about what the cave might do. Most of them can probably accurately be described as geological arm waving, but one theory is that we're going to hit the river and it's just going to sump out. It's just going to be too muddy. The other theory is it's going to take a hard right and go down valley. So there actually is a resurgence kind of up here at the top of this image, fairly large resurgence, but it's on the opposite side of the river, and there's plenty of other karsts, as you can see, to support a large resurgence. There's not actually that much water in tiers, so you'd have to pick up quite a bit of water between there and then. I tend to fall on I think we're just going to sump out at river level somewhere just over 2,000 feet. But I don't really have anything hard to back that up. But I do think that chances of us cracking 2,000 feet are pretty good. We just got to go back out there and do it. Here's just a couple last photos of everybody exiting the cave. James Hunter took these. I just love these because everybody's just so exhausted and shot, but they're still kind of happy to be out of the cave. It's a real mixed bag of emotions. You can kind of see, it looks like me and Matt here are forcing smiles just for the camera. He seems a little bit happier in this one. I finally, after kind of drying out, can come up with maybe half a real smile. And there's George and Tommy looking maybe a little bit happier, maybe a little bit younger, a little more resilient. So reverse the whole process. Everybody comes out. At that point, we had about 8 people left out of the original 25. Hauled all that gear back over the mountain pass to where the mules picked it back up. The mules come back down to the river and drop. They take most of the gear out, but they drop our boats at the river. And on the 21-mile hike or whatever it is, we raft about 10 or 12 of it out. Unfortunately, the team on week 1, everybody's looking forward to the raft out. It's kind of like the victory dance after this hard, cold caving trip. But there was some mix-up logistically with the mules, and their boats didn't get dropped. So they showed up at the river, kind of expecting the hard work to be done, only to find that their boats weren't there, and they had to hike the remaining 12 miles out. So we were pretty bummed about that. But the second team, the last team, our boats were there when we showed up. So this is us kind of prepping. You can see, some of us have these sort of cheap Walmart Explorer 200, Explorer 300 boats. Some of us have nice alpaca rafts, so it's quite a mix. I think one of the forest rangers one year kind of looked at us and he said, "I think we can tell that you guys have a wide range of socioeconomic statuses amongst your group." But here we are getting ready for the raft trip. Here we are putting in the next day. You can see this is a little climate raft. I think that might be, not sure whose that is, but those are super lightweight, but maybe the least water worthy. I have something similar. It's a Supai. They're about the same. This nice little mule train in the background too, you can see. But then off we go. You kind of throw all the cave gear back on to stay kind of warm, throw your helmet on to be safe. Everybody has a life jacket. Most of it's pretty tame, but with an 80-pound pack on your raft, this is a picture from, I think, 2016 of Ian Checkett going through one of the rapids. We do tend to flip quite a few rafts. It's maybe class 3 at the top. And you can kind of try to cheat and get around some of those rapids, but in those Walmart boats, man, we usually don't have a year where somebody doesn't flip. Finally, just going to highlight again that it's been a huge group project. Go through a couple of the years. This is 2019. We're missing the team that helped haul us in, but this is most of the 2019 team. This is all of the 2016 team. You can see that flag in the background. And this is 2014, the year that we kind of broke the depth record. One of the nice things that's happened, sort of silver lining of the quarantine, is we got a whole bunch of these people on a Zoom call one night, kind of had this tier Zoom call reunion, which, given that, we now have people that have camped in the cave that have never even met each other, it was kind of fun to swap stories and have a cocktail. So we'll be back. If you have any interest in tight, cold, somewhat miserable cave, let us know. And if you have any other questions about the trip, feel free to email me at pete@caves.org. And that's about it. Hopefully we'll be back with more news about the deepest cave in 2021 or 22 maybe. We'll see how we feel.